Alright, so it's been a couple days since the Toronto Maple Leafs lost to the Florida Panthers in round 2 of the playoffs, and by the way, let me just say, if you're a Leafs fan, that one's got to be tough to watch. You had a goal called back, a holding on the final goal, and it just felt like the refs were against you a little bit, but you know, it's in the past, you got to move forward, and what should Leafs fans think about this season, and how do we think they should go moving forward? So we're going to talk about that right now. So starting with this season in general, I think if you're a Leafs fan, there's a lot of promise and hope coming out of this season. Even though I wouldn't call it a success, I also wouldn't call it a failure. Even though you don't make the Stanley Cup, I think that it's not always cup or bust for every team, even if you're as stacked as the Maple Leafs were. So the Maple Leafs go into the round 2 series after winning their first playoff series in a very long time, so that's a plus for Leafs fan. But after acquiring all those pieces at the trade deadline, you gotta wonder if they didn't really meet their ceiling this season. And what should they do moving forward? You've been running it with this core for so long, and it just isn't really showing off when it comes to the playoffs. And I think at this point, after changing coach after coach and GM, I think it's more about the players than it really is the staff and the adjustments that they make, because I think Sheldon Keefe is getting a lot of flack for this series, but personally, I think he made a lot of good adjustments. And if you're a Maple Leafs fan, you can't just keep blaming the staff. You got to look at your players long and hard and say, do they want it enough? And I saw a quote from one of the fans that said, just like from Shoresy, the players just don't hate to lose. So they might not want to win, but they don't care if they lose. And I think that that's a problem when you're the Toronto Maple Leafs, a franchise that is probably the biggest in the sport, and you have players all through your roster that should be winning a Stanley Cup, but they're just not. So in my eyes, there's 5 players that I would say the Leafs should consider trading when it comes this season. So it's Auston Matthews, Mitch Marner, John Tavares, William Nylander, and Morgan Rielly. And I know some of those don't seem like big adjustments, but say you have Auston Matthews who wants $15 million a year. Do you trade him off for maybe a first-round pick and more than that, obviously, because he's worth that? Or do you re-sign him to the 13, 14, 15 million that he's asking for? Do you trade a guy like Mitch Marner? I saw a little mock trade for something like Mitch Marner for Artemi Panarin and Alexis Lafreniere or Capo Caco from the Rangers, and it's really just more about shaking up the identity of this group to see if maybe you can get a guy who's been there and has done enough for their organization to push them to a Stanley Cup, rather than just continuing to run it back with this core that just doesn't really seem to have that grit and toughness it takes to win a Stanley Cup. So, I mean, personally, I love the core for this Leafs organization. A lot of the players expressed that they want to stay with the club. Everyone basically except Ryan O'Reilly, who I think is going to test the free agent market after this season, but Auston Matthews came out and said that he wanted to re-sign with the Leafs. William Nylander said he wants to stay for a while. Obviously, Mitch Marner's locked up, and John Tavares' contract might be tough to move, but I just think maybe shaking it up a little bit. Dish off John Tavares if you have to. Give Auston Matthews the C and really give him the responsibility of being the gritty leader that he should be. And if you're the Maple Leafs, and maybe the fan base, what do you think about this? Would you rather continue to run it back with this core after continuing to maybe just not hit your ceiling as an organization? Or do you think maybe it's time to shake it up and trade a guy like Auston Matthews or Mitch Marner, or a lesser role like John Tavares, Morgan Rielly, something like that? Let me know what you think, Leafs fans, in the comments below. I'm sorry about this season. I really had high expectations for them, especially after the first round knocked off a couple of the big dogs. But drop your comments and feelings about this team below. Like the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. I'll see you in the next one.